Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. The Spring Economic Statement contains a lot of data and statistics, very important data and statistics, but they translate into one thing, and that's opportunity. The opportunity to secure the economic and the social recovery, to spread the benefits of growth, and to relentlessly raise living standards, to ensure that everybody who wants a job gets a job, to ensure that work pays a living wage so families can get on rather than just get by, to ensure that we can invest additional money to build new schools and healthcare facilities, to ensure that we have more Gardaí on our streets so that our communities are safe and secure for our loved ones, to ensure we maintain a strong welfare state to protect our vulnerable and older citizens, and to ensure that a generation can come home to a rebuilt, better Ireland of new hopes, dreams and possibilities. That is the potential underpinned by the data and statistics. And today, I can say to the House there are other welcome statistics. The latest Live Register figures released this morning show the number of people on the Live Register has fallen to 343,000. This is a reduction of 45,000 or 11.6% since April 2014. Unemployment is at 10% and it's continuing to fall. By contrast, when this government took office, unemployment was soaring towards a crisis peak of 15.1%. Through very determined policies and implementation, we have turned that around. But we have a lot more work to do because a 10% unemployment rate remains far too high. But the progress made by this government on the employment front underlines a crucial point: to secure the recovery, to deliver on our economic potential and to realise the opportunities for our people. It really is essential that we stay on a proper course. And that is the course which has been laid out by Labour and Fine Gael in government. The Spring Economic Statement is a snapshot of the Irish economy at this point in time, spring of 2015. It's a description of the policies that have brought us to this point. It paints a picture of where we are now. And it lays out the government's strategy for managing the economy out to 2020 and making the most of the opportunities for all our people. The statement is also the first step in a reformed budget process, and it provides a framework for debate. We want a meaningful discussion as to how government might use the limited flexibility available to ensure that the recovery is sustained and that the benefits are fairly spread. And we're starting that debate in this House this week. But it will continue in full public view in the National Economic Dialogue in Dublin Castle in early summer. And I want to say I welcome this new process. I want to thank Minister Brendan Howlin for the very significant reforms he has introduced in this and other areas. In terms of the debate, it is undeniable that we are moving rapidly in a good direction. More people at work, businesses opening up again and beginning to prosper. You can see it even in the streets. People visiting, tourists, local people, people shopping again. And that feeling that the turn is on is palpably there. If this prediction of the Department of Finance of 4% growth in the economy this year, which is in the documentation, if this prediction is met, Ireland will once again rate as the fastest growing economy in the European Union. And all the other economic indicators are moving in the right direction too. Consumer spending is up, business investment is up, our national debt as a percentage of GDP is falling fast. Our budget targets have been exceeded once again. Most important of all, as previously mentioned, employment is continuing to rise. There are more and more people at work, and that work is full-time work. And today's stats from the CSO show that again. and unemployment and the live register continues, as I said, to fall. And the government has set an ambitious target to reach full employment by 2018, and today's figures confirm that we are well on the way to meeting that target. When we compare this with the experience of other crisis-hit countries, this actually would be a very major achievement, a historical achievement actually. Finland and Sweden, for instance, experienced their own financial and economic crisis during the 1990s, and it took them close on 2 decades to get employment back to pre-crisis levels. We want 2.1 million people working by 2018, and through Pathways to Work and the Action Plan for Jobs, we have the strategies to achieve it. We will continue to pursue foreign direct investment. We will continue to encourage local, Indigenous industry and business, particularly in the SME sector. Small businesses are the beating heart of communities up and down the country, and it's a priority of mine to provide them with every possible support. I was out in a small business centre yesterday, and the level of activity and the variety of ventures that people were undertaking, from catering to IT-based small startups, this is what is going to get us to full employment. My own department will continue to play its part under the Pathways to Work. Since the first day I became Minister for Social Protection, I've been determined that the department should do much more than simply hand out welfare payments to job seekers. The department now actively helps individuals to identify the best way to get back into the workforce, whether that be through education and training or work experience. And in my experience, education, upskilling, investing in people is actually the most important part of all of this. The work experience, you know, the numbers of people I've met who have, certainly when we came into government, had great education and qualifications, but they'd never worked at a job, so they couldn't land the interview to get the job because they'd no experience. Thankfully, that's changing. One of the best features of recent times has been the fact that in all our third-level institutions, employers are back recruiting people in 4th year to go to work and train on their graduation. I mean, it's just fantastic to experience it. The law firms, the accounting firms, the engineering firms, the consulting firms, they're all back recruiting our young, bright, well-educated graduates. And actually employers are telling me that they actually need more of these people. So we've actually had a turnout and a turnaround in relation to employment, which, if you consider the template that we were offered some years ago, is a little short, to be honest, of a miracle in terms of the turnaround. We're now below the Eurozone average in terms of unemployment figures. We were the outliers. We were so far above it. So in terms of the department, we don't just help job seekers, we help employers as well. And it's bringing the job seekers and the employers who are looking for the people to get together is the next very important achievement we're looking for. Jobs Plus, for example, is a simple scheme that pays monthly cash grants to employers who hire people who have been long-term unemployed. Jobs Plus is particularly advantageous to small businesses, and more than 4,000 people have returned to work under that scheme alone. In terms of the larger employers in this country, the department will very shortly appoint new key account managers in its employer engagement unit. We're actually going out and knocking on employers' doors and through the Labour Market Council, talking to the big employers. When you have vacancies, we want people who are currently, unfortunately, mostly through no fault of their own, without employment because they lost their job. We want you to give them an opportunity to go go for some of those job vacancies. These key account managers will be working with some of the 460 largest employers in the state. And I want to commend the organisations like the ESB, like Irish Rail, like Aircom, like Aer Lingus, who have begun to recruit apprentices and trainees, because again, for a lot of young people, particularly young men, apprenticeship is where they would like to begin their working experience. So through all of this work, they will identify and plan recruitment requirements and actively promote candidates from the live register for available positions. So I will keep all of these schemes, supports and interventions under constant review to ensure that we're meeting the needs of job seekers and employers alike. This in turn will help to increase further the momentum we're making on the jobs front. I'm determined to ensure that unemployment will fall below 9% this year, and to ensure that tens of thousands of people benefit from new jobs, new opportunities and share in the recovery. The tangible evidence of the recovery is what our friends in the economic trade call fiscal space. Basically what that means is simply the scope that we have to increase public spending and to reduce USC and taxes in terms of what we know how this year is going to date and how we expect it to go for the rest of the year. It's very, very simple. If we were a family, if I was sitting down around my kitchen table, I'm looking forward to later this year for next year and saying, what can I do? What can I do in terms of putting money into health and education and into, on the other side, reducing taxes, reforming the USC? It's as simple as that, although it does go by a fairly fancy name. And it's important to appreciate that this scope is not determined just by the level of the budget deficit, which we want to target, and everybody here knows what that is. It's also determined by the application of the technical rules we agreed to when approving the EU Fiscal Treaty. And the purpose of these rules is to smooth out increases and reductions in public spending over the economic cycle, and that's to avoid the boom and the bust cycle which we have seen so often under previous governments. It was John Maynard Keynes who famously said that when the capital development of a country becomes a byproduct of the activities of a casino, the job is likely to be ill done. That was Fianna Fáil's way. Throw all the chips on unsustainable land speculation, construction boom, spend it when you have it, and hope, like Mr Macabre, that something comes along if harder times hit. That's the casino model. And in Fianna Fáil's case, who came along? The Troika. That's who Fianna Fáil brought along. This government waved goodbye to the Troika, and we have waved goodbye to Fianna Fáil's destructive economic model too. We will abide by the fiscal rules to ensure spending increases are kept at sustainable levels, and that we do build up something in reserve for the famous rainy day. This means being prudent and planning for the future. The statement therefore identifies the room we have sitting around the table as we discuss what we're going to do next. It identifies that room at the moment as being between 1.2 billion and 1.5 billion. And that is a sensible and sustainable level of investment, given how strongly our economy is now performing. The exact figures will be decided, obviously, closer to budget day, when we have more information available to us. But when you look at the tax returns month on month, and when you look particularly at the PRSI returns, you actually see the flow-through of revenue into the government as a result of more people and businesses being at work, and those who are at work having more activity. You can actually see it on a month-by-month basis. The government has decided that 50% of the available space will be used to reform USC and taxation, and the other half will be used in respect of spending. In doing that, we're looking to strike a balance between putting more money in people's pockets and investing in the services on which we all depend. Obviously, the details of the budget package for 2016 have not yet been decided. The Government is anxious that we should have a thorough debate on the options that are available, and we will be convening the National Economic Dialogue for that purpose in a few weeks' time. I think it might be useful if I set out some of my priorities for the budget in general terms. I think the Taoiseach is pretty familiar with them at this stage because we had long discussions immediately after I became the leader of the Labour Party when I agreed a statement of government priorities with the Taoiseach on behalf of Fine Gael. In that statement, the two parties confirmed that we would look to reduce the burden of overall taxation for people on low and middle incomes in work in the two remaining budgets of this term. We began this process in October when we reduced for this year the two lower rates of USC and took large numbers of people on low income out of the USC altogether. We also reduced the marginal rate of tax for people earning less than $70,000 and raised the level of income at which the marginal rate is payable, which is one of the most difficult things about our tax system compared to other countries. And I expect that the Government will continue the broad thrust of this approach when we come to agree the tax package for 2016. Low and middle income earners will continue to be our priority, continuing to remove the low paid out of the USC net and progressively lowering taxes for those people who are on middle incomes. In doing so, we will continue to rebalance the tax system, work which is already underway. This means reducing tax on labour so as to boost employment and ensure the recovery is sustained. And it's a classical stimulus model of social democracy all around the world, and it works. We also need to ensure that Ireland will be a welcoming place for the many emigrants who want to return home. In particular, we need to ensure that taxes on labour do not act as a disincentive for those who want to return. I recall the remarks made by my colleague Brendan Howlin when he presented the Haddington Road Agreement to this House in 2013. At that time, he said he fully expected that on the next occasion government sat down with the public sector unions, it would be to discuss pay improvements and not pay reductions. This is exactly what I expect to happen when the Minister meets those unions in a couple of weeks' time. Public servants have made a huge contribution to getting this country out of the financial crisis brought about by the disastrous management of the Fianna Fáil Green government. The pension levy of 2009, the pay reductions of 2010 and the adjustments of Haddington Road have resulted in a significant loss of pay for all public and civil servants, and the Government is aware of the fact and the very significant reforms to which public servants have signed up. The public services are being delivered with many fewer staff than were employed at the start of the recession. And I want to publicly express my appreciation to public servants for the forbearance, the commitment that they've demonstrated at a time of national crisis. I know that many individual families have really struggled to make ends meet and that this has been a very difficult time for them. It would be foolish and irresponsible for me to give the impression that the cuts of the last few years can be undone in one fell swoop. But I do hope that we'll be able to make a start in the near future. And that's really about improving living standards, helping people to have a better standard of living, helping families, particularly families with children, helping pensioners and people who've retired. And I know that Minister Howlin and his officials are committed to sitting down with our colleagues in the trade union movement in a few weeks' time with a view to agreeing a way forward. I'm very conscious that 80% of Irish workers work in the private sector and not in the public sector. I've already said that government will look to improve the circumstances of those on low and middle incomes by reducing income tax. We will also implement an increase in the national minimum wage if that's recommended by the Low Pay Commission, but I also expect that private sector employers will play their part in improving wages, as many are already doing. IBEC have already stated that they expect a majority of their members to increase the pay of their workers this year, and I welcome that. I appreciate that not all businesses have come through the recession unscathed, but we also know that many more businesses are now profitable. It's entirely appropriate that employers who can afford to do so should agree wage increases with their workers. And it's in the interests of both employers and employees, and in the interests of the economy as a whole. Since I became Minister for Social Protection, I've been determined to protect core social welfare rates, and I'm pleased that I've been able to do so. Now that the recession is over, we are able to consider targeted improvements and supports. We began the process in the most recent budget with the introduction of the Back to Work family dividend, increases in child benefit and the living alone allowance, and the partial restoration of the Christmas bonus. Government has already announced our intention of further increasing child benefit in the forthcoming budget, and I'm looking at other targeted improvements which can be made in 2016, including further improvements to the Christmas bonus. In this year's budget, we made provision for more nurses, more teachers, more special needs assistants. We're also recruiting new Gardaí for the first time since the collapse of the economy. As the leader of the Labour Party, I'm an enthusiastic proponent of quality, well-financed public services that deliver high quality to citizens. This crisis greatly reduced the scope to improve services. It was a case of protecting them as best as we possibly could while fighting to regain our economic sovereignty. But we are in a much more different and better space now. As we return to financial good health, I look forward to making greater progress in improving public services in the next few years. One of the main drivers behind this investment is the population changes we're experiencing. We have more older people who require care, more young people who require schools, and more children who require childcare. It's patently obvious that 1.2 to 1.5 billion will not allow us to do all that we would like to do next year. Having said that, the forecasts in the spring statement make clear that if we continue to manage the economy responsibly, we can look forward to similar improvements in years to come. This will see a gradual but clear improvement in our public services and in our standards of living. I said at the start of my contribution that our country is in a much better place than it was 4 years ago when this government took office. This is unquestionably true, but, and this is important, the recovery is not yet entirely secure. We could be blown off course by international events beyond our control. We could also be set back by domestic events which are within our control. This country needs stable government. It needs responsible management of the economy. It needs parties and governments who are willing to face up to the social challenges of our time. We do not need and cannot afford the instability and mismanagement that would be inevitable if the parties opposite had any influence on government, judging by the promises and the positions they've taken. This is not a time to take risks. As we acknowledge the progress made over the last few years, it's worth remembering that back in 2011 there were siren voices demanding that we do things a different way. Deputy Adams first wanted to tell the European Union to take a hike. I think he said that a bit more colourfully, to take a hike and to take its money with it. But then he doesn't have to worry about economics, as he told us. In all of this, Sinn Féin neglects to mention what it's delivering in government in Northern Ireland at the moment. 20,000 public sector jobs cut for a start. While this government announced 1,700 new teachers and education posts in the recent budget, Sinn Féin is slashing the number of teachers in the north.
Disgraceful. Disgraceful.
Yet they have the goal. Yet they have the goal to lecture this government while being the leaders of austerity in the north. For all their rhetoric, it would seem Sinn Féin conveniently forgets the north when they want to. Before next year's spring statement is delivered, the country will choose a new government. The people of this country will have to decide who they want to stand up in this House to read that statement. Fianna Fáil, the people who caused the crisis in the first place; Sinn Féin, the party that would return us to the crisis, judging by their current plan for the north; the independents, who can't govern themselves, let alone govern the country; and we know the hard left. We know that the hard left are opposed to governing. In short, Ceann Comhairle, there is a pathway to difficulty and despair, which the parties opposite may surely lead us on. But there is also a pathway to continued progress as set out by this government in these statements. The past 7 years have been very difficult for our country. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs, many others emigrated. Householders have experienced debt and negative equity for the first time, many of them, in their lives. The effects of the recession were always going to take time to pass. It has been the people's sacrifices, the people's perseverance in the face of uphill struggle that have enabled us to get to this point, where we've reached the brow of the hill and we can actually see our destination. An Ireland of opportunity and prosperity for all. But we've not reached that destination yet, but it's in sight and within reach. And the spring statement is a measure of the progress which we've already made. It's also a challenge to government to ensure that the benefits of the recovery are spread fairly and that nobody is left behind. This is a challenge which we can, we must, and we will meet head-on. And at the end of the day, it's about improving living standards for families, for individuals, and particularly improving not just the living standards, but the opportunities that we can create for all of our children.